served as vice president of the Recycled Energy Development Company and as Midwest Director for Clean Energy for the Environmental Defense Fund. In the past, Dick had many, many roles. Northeast Midwest Institute, where we worked together closely. And before then, environmental action, all sorts of good things that Dick did. So this is fun to do with Dick. I'm interested and thrilled by his new book, in which he's profiling 25 innovators who are working to grow food in a new way. And rather than look back to pre-industrial ways, these entrepreneurs are addressing our key farm and food challenges as we move into the future. It's an area where the Environmental Law and Policy Center expects, plans, and is becoming more deeply engaged. I really look forward to hearing what Dick has to say, and I know you do too. Plenty of time for Q&A. We'll try to make sure we get as many questions as people have and some responses for Dick. So without much more ado, let me turn this over to my good friend and colleague, Dick Munson. Thank you, Dick, for joining us, and thank you for everybody who's joined us today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lerner. And through that introduction, you were making me feel old. But I appreciate the kind invitation and the introduction. Thanks also to you and ELPC for consistently being leaders on key environmental challenges. You've done remarkable work. As Howard mentioned, I am writing a book that looks at food and farm innovators. I'm going to try and pull up my screen here just a second. It's currently a work in progress, so I thank you for joining today, being, if you will, somewhat of my guinea pigs, because I hope that you'll provide feedback and recommendations as I try and finish the book and hopefully get it out, published by Island Press sometime around September. Let me begin just by suggesting that these two images, you have vast farms in central Illinois, you have the sleek office buildings in Silicon Valley and other tech centers. They present, or have presented for quite some time, totally different perspectives on the American economy. Farming, in fact, was the least digitalized sector of the American economy for years. Yet today, I've just found entrepreneurs who are demonstrating that these worlds are colliding, and as a result, they are disrupting the agricultural industry. These new technologies are redefining what it means to farm and even what the nature of food. Ag tech startups have soared about 80% annually since 2012. They attracted about $17 billion in venture capital investment in 2019 alone. So I profile about 25 food and farm innovators. We'll meet a few of them in a minute, but just to give you a sense of the breadth of this new wave of entrepreneurs, let me highlight just a couple broad categories. You have, alums of Amazon who are growing crops year-round within large computer-controlled warehouses that look a lot like massive Amazon distribution centers. They're moving farming closer to consumers. They're increasing food freshness. They're reducing waste. They're eliminating chemicals, and they're transforming agriculture from the horizontal to the vertical. You have medical doctors who have left that profession and they're now making meats from plants and cultured stem cells, delivering proteins without slaughtering animals. You have roboticists that are sending autonomous machines into fields to pick fruit and pluck weeds, thereby reducing both human drudgery and curtailing the need for poisonous herbicides. You have biochemists, including a spinoff from the lab of Jennifer Doudna, who just recently won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, that are using this CRISPR gene editing tool to breed plants that tolerate droughts as climate change advances or capture carbon in a hope to retard further climate change. You have chefs that are creating meals with 3D printers that are about the size of microwaves. And I think one of my favorites is you have chemists that are making vodka and other products out from carbon dioxide. So you have this great combo of getting to have a buzz at the same time that you get to sequester greenhouse gases. So these and other Innovators, I argue, are supplanting the long-standing debate between big ag and return to husbandry advocates. While industrial ag or big ag has focused a lot on chemicals, concentrated feedlots, irrigation, you have the reformers who have argued for organic or regenerative cultivation, free-range animals, and winter cover crops. Yet neither camp, I suggest, has proven capable of providing sufficient supplies of nutritious food without environmental damage. Malnutrition and pollution flourish under big ag. And despite decades of appeals, organic farming consists of less than 1% of US croplands, and even its advocates argue that the broad adoption of regenerative practices has failed to materialize. So I want to suggest that these largely unrecognized innovators present a third path, if you will, an alternative that advances disruptive technologies, not just to feed nutritiously a growing population, but to do so with the express goal of sustainability. So before we meet a couple of these, let me pose what I think are three kind of obvious questions about this emerging innovation. The first, of course, is why now? I mean, we've known for some time about the health, equity, and environmental problems associated with conventional agriculture. So why are food and farm innovators suddenly attracting investments and capturing markets? I think the short answer is opportunity. Consider, for instance, that big ag invests shockingly little, less than 1% of their budgets in research and development. I suggest that offers an opening to science and technology-focused innovators. Consider also that we live in an era of rapid technology development that is advancing across numerous economic sectors. We have sophisticated sensors that collect enormous quantities of data. We have much more powerful computers that can process that enormous information and deliver real-time insights. We have autonomous machines or robots that perform complex tasks with speed and precision. Eric Schmidt, who used to be the CEO of Google, he looked at this radical convergence of data, computation, and advanced engineering. We refer to it as the super evolution that will fundamentally, irrevocably transform wide-ranging industries. And he claims this super evolution is perfect for startups. It allows them to advance faster than the incumbents, or big ag in this case, resulting in what he called agile, powerful companies. And within just the past few years, really within 8 to 10 at the most, this super evolution finally made its way to the agricultural sector, the least digitalized in our economy, spurred by competitive entrepreneurs and deep-pocket investors looking for profit through innovation. Second question, obviously, is why do we need the change? I mean, perhaps big ag has been resistant to innovation because in some ways the current food system works well. You go to any supermarket at any time of the year, and you expect to choose from a cornucopia of in and out of season produce, as well as a huge assortment of cereals, meats, and dairy products. Yet I argue that agriculture is in trouble, causes trouble, and needs disruption. Industrialized agriculture, according to some calculations, is the biggest cause of climate change. Plowing exposes farmlands to rain and wind. We are losing 30 soccer fields of soil every single minute. Clear-cutting forests to make room for more farms, to grow more corn and soybeans, to feed more cattle, releases enormous quantities of greenhouse gases. Irrigating crops suck up 80% of the planet's fresh water, depleting aquifers and acidifying soils. Toxic pesticides attack biodiversity, and the runoff of such chemicals, Howard, you'll appreciate this one, creates dead zones such as here in Lake Erie, where no life can survive. Unfortunately, agriculture's environmental problems are poised to become worse. The World Bank finds that providing food security to a growing population will, and I quote, entail clearing most of the world's remaining forests, wiping out thousands of species, and releasing enough greenhouse gas emissions to exceed the warming targets enshrined in the Paris Agreement, even if emissions from all other human activities were entirely eliminated. This damage is sometimes cast as the inevitable cost of feeding almost 10 billion people by the year 2050. That's about 2 billion more than we have now. That's about the equivalent of adding 1.5 Chinas within the next 30 years. In truth, the world's farmers already produce enough calories to nourish 10 billion humans. It's just that few of those calories go to humans. Instead, almost 40% is lost as a result of wasted food. 30% goes to feeding cattle and other animals, and about 5% brews biofuels and industrial products. Another fundamental problem with agriculture relates to food quality, equity, and distribution. We know this here. I mean, this is a long line of people waiting for food at food banks. And today, 815 million people around the world go hungry, and another 2 billion are overweight or obese. Fully 20% of worldwide deaths result from bad nutrition, more than the mortality from alcohol, drug, and tobacco abuse combined. So a third question, the third of the last one, is should we trust these new innovative technologies? And my answer is certainly not blindly. We had the green revolution technologists of the 1950s and 60s that did really an amazing job in increasing crop yields and reducing worldwide hunger, but they also poisoned our lands and waters and decreased food diversity. Think about DDT. Even think about margarine, for heaven's sakes. I mean, these were supposed innovations that did not turn out like they were supposed to. So I would suggest that we have and we must use the tools in the new modern sensors and data analysis to judge whether today's entrepreneurs live up to what they claim are their two values. One, their long-term sustainability. Do they protect the planet? And also, do they provide equity? Do they provide nutritious food to a growing population? So for context, just appreciate that agriculture is the world's largest industry, and food is the core of so many of our key issues, from climate change to immigration to health and social equity. Food also prompts heated ethical debates about eating choices, particularly about whether we should obtain proteins by eating animal meat. And believe me, I do not pretend to resolve those debates. To give you a sense of just the stakes that are involved, the Eat Lancet Commission said food is the single strongest lever to optimize human health and environmental sustainability on Earth. So my book, as I said, profiles 25 food and farm innovators that are trying to achieve that optimization. They come from a variety of professional and ethnic backgrounds, but interestingly, almost all of them had no previous experience in agriculture. But together they represent a revolution in how we farm and what we eat. So let's meet a few. We'll start with one that you might know, or at least you might have tasted his product. This is Patrick, or Pat Brown. He had his dream job as professor of biochemistry at Stanford, where he helped discover how to block particles such as the AIDS virus from infecting other cells. But about 10 years ago, on a sabbatical, he decided that there were bigger global challenges to tackle, and he felt that the most important one was how we raise and slaughter animals to supply proteins. He felt that he could write academic papers and organize workshops, but that wouldn't be enough to convince people to eat less meat. So he, in 2011, founded Impossible Foods to create what he said was an indistinguishable plant-based substitute to animal meat. He had a hunch that heme is the iron-rich and oxygen-carrying particle within blood and muscle tissues. It's also in a few plants. He felt that heme could give meat substitutes their protein and their meaty flavor, while avoiding the pollution and the slaughter associated with conventional animal agriculture. So he spent 5 years dissecting and combining a variety of plants that contained heme. He started off with clover and eventually sort of focused on the fermented roots of soybeans. And he created a plant-based burger that offers a meat-like appearance and taste. Last year, Impossible Burgers sold in 17,000 retail outlets, including the Burger King chain. It's still a niche market, no doubt. Big ag is about $176 billion industry annually. But sales of plant-based meats are growing at a rate of 28% annually. And UBS, this is the Swiss-based bank, predicts that plant-based sales will soar from about 4.6 billion today to about 85 billion by 2030. That's about half of what conventional meat delivers today. Another innovator trying to take the slaughter and pollution out of meat production is Uma Valete. He came to the United States from India on a cardiology residency at the Mayo Clinic. And he studied how stem cells were repairing muscle tissue that were damaged by heart attacks. And he said, why couldn't stem cells also be used to grow muscle tissue, or in other words, meat? So he concluded, and this is his quote, "If I continued as a cardiologist, I might save a few thousand lives over the next 30 years. But if I'm successful in helping to change the way meat is made, I can positively impact billions of human lives and trillions of animal lives." So in 2015, he founded Memphis Meats. He highlights the environmental problems associated with conventional animal agriculture, particularly belching cows. They burp a lot, and when they burp, they emit more methane than even the oil and gas industry, or all forms of transportation combined. He also criticizes the factory-like feedlots that spew tremendous amounts of toxic excrement and act as breeding grounds for diseases and viruses. His biggest grievance, his personally, is just big meat's cruelty, going back to the issue of the controversies associated with food. So he says, even beyond the mass slaughters, he complains about animals' living conditions. Here, you see egg-laying hens that cannot walk about or spread their wings in cages whose floor space is a bit smaller than a piece of printer paper. Pigs, moreover, are often placed at these feedlots in pens where they can barely move. Valete's alternative, his innovation, is that he extracts a few cells painlessly from an animal and inserts them in a growth potion made up of nutrients, salts, acidic buffers. And these cells then multiply in bioreactors, what Valete likes to call cultivators. They look and they actually act a lot like fermentation tanks within a beer brewery. He admits that some consumers are going to think it's weird to eat cell-cultured meat. But the entrepreneur argues that it's less weird. Here are a few of his products from, cultured cell production. He thinks it's less weird than eating slaughtered animals, and that people, he believes, will embrace these new offerings once they experience their meaty tastes and understand their environmental and health benefits. Costs are dropping amazingly quickly. Cultured beef next year is expected to cost about $10 a pound. That's still about 20% more than grass-fed meat, but it is an amazing decline from the $1.2 million per pound that was paid for the first cell-based patty that was introduced only 9 years ago. So promising to cut costs further, Valete has attracted investments from Bill Gates, Richard Branson, and other high-profile investors. So let me introduce just a couple more innovators, but I'll do it more quickly. We have Diane Wu and Purnima Paraswaran. They met in graduate school at Stanford, and they formed Trace Genomics in 2015 to map the health of soils and the state of the microbes that are living within soils. They essentially offer DNA kits for soils, not unlike the genetic tests such as 23andMe that provide insights into a human's ancestry, health, and traits. They collect vast quantities of data from these soil samples about bacteria and minerals and other things in the soil, and then they compare it through their own proprietary algorithm to thousands of other soil samples and provide actionable intelligence to farmers about which seeds to plant in which soils, what nutrients to feed the soil's microbes, and how to avoid diseases that are lurking in the dirt. They argued that what they're doing is, in the past, these decisions about the growing season have been made by farmers as sort of an art form, if you will, and they're claiming that they are bringing it now to make it a science. Jenny Dew, James Rogers, and Lou Perez, they're cutting food waste in half. They have PhDs in material science and chemistry from UC Santa Barbara, a great school, my alma mater. They devise plant-based coatings that double or triple the shelf life of avocados, oranges, or other produce. We waste, as I mentioned before, about 40% of our food. You have to think about just how staggering that is. But spoilage, according to these innovators, results largely from water loss or oxidation. That's water evaporating out of the produce or oxygen getting in. So they created natural, tasteless, invisible, edible coatings that act as a physical barrier to keep water in and oxygen out. Their company, Appeal Sciences, just a few months ago, closed another $250 million capital raise, including investments from Oprah Winfrey. So bringing their startup's total valuation above $1 billion, making it yet another ag tech, what they refer to as unicorn. Irving Fain, he's the CEO of Bowery. He boasts that his indoor vertical farms produce 100 times the output of conventional horizontal plots, and that his robot-controlled hydroponic systems use 95% less water and no harmful fertilizers or chemicals. This is an inside look of one of his smaller ones, I must point out. Perhaps most significant, Bowery's growing season, it never ends. So they are able to deliver fresh and organic greens to supermarkets even during cold or snowy January days. Bowery, or at least Fain in particular, is proud of what he sees as bringing economic development to inner city communities. So he proudly asserts that this high-tech farming provides good-paying jobs in formerly abandoned spaces within neglected neighborhoods. Thomas Palomares and Sebastian Boyer, they grew up as friends in France before they attended graduate school at MIT and Stanford. They created a company called FarmWise to eliminate the use of poisonous herbicides. Their autonomous machines detect weeds and scoop them out by their roots. The startup began by taking hundreds of thousands of pictures of different weeds and crops at various stages of development and under different growing conditions. And with algorithms and machine learning, similar to the face recognition technology that Google and others use, they created images of what needs to be removed and what needs to be protected. And after that differentiating, as they travel autonomously through the field, they remove the unwanted weeds. And as a result, they eliminate herbicide use, they avoid hours of backbreaking manual labor, and they help resolve the labor shortages that plague growers. Virginia Emery, she has a PhD from Berkeley in entomology. She calls herself, interestingly, the bug lady. That's because she's figured out an innovative way to breed insects, and lots of them, in order to provide high-value protein and nutrients now she's targeting chickens and fish farms. Her company is called Beta Hatch. They avoid chemicals, erosion, and the irrigation associated with conventional animal feed that's made mostly from corn and soybeans. Her favorite, which you're looking at, are mealworm beetles. They take up little space, they breed throughout the year, they eat virtually everything, including contaminated waste, and they emit few pollutants or greenhouse gases. Bugs, says Emery, are the most sustainable response to agriculture's challenges. And my final introduction for the day, this is Josh Goldman. He pays particular attention to those burping cows that emit methane, a lot of methane, which is a climate-changing gas that's about 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. He's the CEO of Australis Aquaculture, and he's found that feeding a type of red seaweed in small amounts to ruminant animals have these 4-stage stomachs like cows and cattle. He found that just a little bit of this red seaweed virtually eliminates all the methane developed during digestion. So he's working to scale up production. And he calculates that if this attitude was given to the world's 2 billion cattle, it would provide the climate equivalent of taking every car on the planet off the road. So I could go on, as Howard knows, with more details about these entrepreneurs, as well as introduce you to many more. But let me suggest that a quiet revolution is disrupting the agricultural sector. And to add a bit of controversy for this discussion, and I suppose relevancy, because probably most of the people on this are conservation focused, allow me to suggest that I think environmentalists, for the most part, are really missing the boat on these new technologies. Despite our verbal praise of innovation, environmentalists tend to ignore entrepreneurs and be skeptical of technology. Most long for the past practices and shy away from private sector disruptors. Allow me to admit that any that list of innovators, some of the ones that I have highlighted are going to fail. They're not going to get larger. They're going to be acquired by others. They're most likely probably going to be overwhelmed by new entrepreneurs. My book could have profiled different visionaries in this dynamic field, but I hope that this small assortment gives you a sense that businessmen and businesswomen are transforming the agricultural sector in quite a broad scope. The growth of food and farm innovators, the super evolution, as Google's former CEO called it, has been astonishingly rapid in the agricultural sector. None of the profiled companies existed even a single decade ago. No entrepreneur was producing cell-based proteins without slaughtering animals. No firm was challenging the horizontal farm and or was growing plants vertically. None plucked weeds robotically, nor nobody was doubling the shelf life of produce with plant-based coatings. So I believe, and I guess I'm advancing the argument, that innovators offer hope in this era of troubled agriculture, hope that we can feed a growing population nutritiously, equitably, and sustainably. So as I mentioned, this is indeed a work in progress. So I welcome your reactions and recommendations. In addition to what might be your questions or comments through the chat, feel free to email me directly at dickmunson50@gmail.com. And again, thank you to Howard and LPC for the invitation, and to you for your interest and participation. So thanks.
All right, I'll say it. Wow. Thank you, Dick. This is really not just interesting, it's important. All right, we have a bunch of questions, Dick. I'm going to try to, folks, pull some of them together. Just please post them on the Q&A. Hey, Dick, from old friend Tom Stanton, talk a little bit about, if you would, methane. Methane is an important problem. For those of you who don't know, it's a very potent greenhouse gas, somewhere between 10 and 20%, 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Are you seeing some pathways, though, in which capturing methane is an economic opportunity to put it to better use? Can you comment on that a little bit, some of the entrepreneurs?
Well, in agriculture, the area where methane keeps coming up is in ways to reduce the belching output from cattle and cows. And so you see a variety of different entrepreneurs. I mentioned the one who was looking at that red seaweed. There's probably about 6 or 7 others that are coming up with different food additives that reduce at different percentages the methane release from that. But you're right, methane is, I think it's most considered to be about 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So we have to figure out some way to reduce its emission. Most groups, I would argue, have been looking at the oil and gas industry, which obviously emits through leakage a lot of methane, and it's costly to them because methane is essentially natural gas from their perspective. And so efforts to try and capture it that way. But I guess I would argue there has not been sufficient focus in the agricultural sector, particularly on, although it sounds silly, burping cows.
Sort of going from burping cows, Dick, to Tom's question about, is there a way in which we ought to be better integrating food, energy, and water policy? And then you have a question from Jenny Jenkins about, is the seaweed that Australia's aquaculture promoting, is that Sargassum or something else by chance? How do we better integrate the two?
And better integrate both
three,
energy and environmental and
water.
Agriculture. And
yeah,
that's I guess my observation is that in all three areas, we have a system that subsidizes the polluting. And at first core, I think we need a systematic route, which ELPC is often doing, of going after those subsidies that lead to contamination. And then at the second side of that is also, I think, an interest in, or we need to have an interest in trying to encourage entrepreneurship. How do we spur innovation and applaud and enhance and open up opportunities for those entrepreneurs who think that they have a better way to integrate, in this case, the reduction of methane across all sectors, agriculture, water, and energy as well.
Yeah, Dick, one of the questions that's raised by a couple of people here is, can you talk about some of the energy use of these facilities? Some of them, just looking at your slides, a lot of light, a lot of heating, a lot of cooling.
Yeah.
But they're operating, as you point out, 24/7, 12 months of the year. So solar is probably less available in terms of power. What's the, electricity use profile of these facilities? How energy efficient are they? How's there a way to make them part of a clean energy solution rather than the opposite?
Well, vertical farms are probably the best example of entities that use a good deal of energy because they've got these lights and they're controlled environments, and the lights and ventilation systems are working full time. I think the companies that I looked at take that quite seriously, and they admit, to be quite honest, that advances in LED lights are the only thing that made vertical indoor farming possible. Without it, it just would not exist at all. And I think that Irving Bain, who I profiled, just announced about last week a new facility that they're opening up, I believe in Kentucky, that he takes great pride in suggesting that it's an efficiency leap from what they've been able to do before, in part because of further advances in LED lighting. His facilities have in the past, because one facility has been close to a small hydro facility, has been using, clean energy in that way. And he's committed to ensuring that his future facilities will be both efficient and also taking advantage of wind and solar. But, I'll come back to the point that I think we need to hold them accountable for doing that, because if you simply have these facilities using, inefficient lights, that are, from coal plants, we're not getting the sustainability benefits that we need. So that's, I think through our sensors and data analysis, we have to make sure that that sustainability impact is in fact achieved.
And for some of you who are less familiar with the nuances of LED lighting, it's not just that LEDs are 90 to 95% more efficient than incandescent bulbs, thereby saving money and avoiding pollution. It's that the technology, you can have greater control over the light spectrum.
Yep.
So if you're a grower, you can adjust, in effect, the spectrum of the light that's hitting what you're trying to grow hydroponically or indoors in a way that really can't be done with incandescent bulbs.
Very good point.
Hey, a couple of questions, Dick, about, is there an industrial use, for example, for cow and pig poop? Are there other ways of using what we see as being a waste and putting it into a more beneficial use?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, another, as I mentioned, these gargantuan feedlots, and they really are huge, that I guess prepare particularly chickens and pigs and cattle or cows for slaughter. These cattle, pigs, and chickens, they poop a lot. And we typically send these into what are called CAFOs, or concentrated, feedlots that, we've been trying to ensure, first of all, don't leak, because the leakage of this stuff into water systems or wells or rivers and lakes is just horrendous. I mean, it's poisonous stuff. But the decomposition of this waste is being used by some entrepreneurs, particularly in states that have declared that these emissions from these facilities need to both be protected and also captured. They do produce essentially a natural gas that could be utilized as a beneficial product and a clean source of energy being taken from what is a very dirty excrement coming from these various animals facing slaughter.
And I think that's picking up, questions here, Tom Stanton and Daniel Engel. Rusty, you had the same sort of question. How do we take something that's a problematic waste product, whether it's cows burping or methane emissions or animal poop, and turn that into something that has an asset value to it? In other words, how do we convert a challenge into an opportunity? Are there any states, are there any companies, Dick, that you've looked at, entrepreneurs who've really seen that as being an opportunity? Or is that, in effect, volume 2 of the new book?
There's not going to be a volume 2. California is at least the one that I have seen that seems to have the most strict state laws in ensuring that this waste gas is captured and processed. And there are several companies, and to be honest, I'm sort of embarrassed at the moment because I can't remember them. I decided not to include one of the leaders of this, largely because I was trying to focus on entrepreneurs that did not depend upon public policy. And maybe that was a stupid thing to do, but I was just thinking about the private sector and the goal for markets of being able to move this rather than policy. And I say this in a weird fashion because I've spent all my life, working on policy, but, so
policy.
But, yes, what I understand from what California has done, and therefore companies have been able to take advantage of the regulation and legislation to capture methane, that clearly should be advanced in other states across the country.
Dick, speaking of markets, friends Peter Nicholson and your old friend of mine, Jerry Unger, asked sort of the same question. Hello, Jerry. What can we do more of on the consumer side? I mean, you've talked about the entrepreneurial opportunity in terms of new means of production, new technologies that can really accelerate new products, whether it's meatless meat, if you will. What can be done in terms of the consumer buying demand side, the pressure side? How does that piece of the market work?
That's a hard one, and largely because eating habits become so sensitive and people become so fervent, almost religious about their views of what is the appropriate diet to take. So, I'd welcome people's, guidance on this, but largely I sort of try to avoid that argument. And if there's any advice, I guess I would have to consumers is try new stuff, because you may like it. And if you do like it, there will be a market for these new innovative products. As I said, Uma Valete thinks that people will find, cell-based meats to be weird, but he thinks that they're less weird and more acceptable after you try it and realize that it still has the same meaty taste and texture that you were longing for with your old burger that just happened to have a lot of environmental and ethical problems associated with it.
Hey, Dick, let's just do something fun here. Can people, if you feel comfortable doing it, folks, there's about 130 people on this webinar. Just put in the chat box. I'd be curious to know, how many of you all have tried fake meat?
They don't like the term fake meat.
Okay. What's the better term, Dick? But go ahead.
Well, I mean, Impossible Burger and others like that use the term plant-based products or plant-based meats.
All right.
Those that are using from cells, they like cell cultured, but I understand where you're coming from. So yes, I'd be curious as to how many people have tried obviously they have not tried the second one, or if they have, they're one of, less than 100. But on the plant-based side, the market seems to be growing. I'd welcome hearing how many people have tried it and like it or not.
I'll note that the first response on that is my colleague, Mary Frances O'Connor, ELPC's great development director, who says, yes, she has.
Good. I've had the Impossible Burger. I must say, I thought it was really quite good. But, again, food tastes and, food ethics are, I don't want to be preaching to people as to what they should be doing. So other than to say, give it a try and see what you think.
All right. There are a lot more questions, but I'm cognizant that we were trying to wrap this up in 45 minutes.
We're there.
First of all, we're there. Thank you to Dick Munson. Thank you to what the entrepreneurs are doing, the innovation that you're describing, because this is exciting. And I really respect your point, which is not all innovations, not all entrepreneurialism works. If we had 100% success rate, either with all the entrepreneurs there and all the innovations, or for that matter, if ELPC and our colleagues succeeded on 100% of what we do, you're probably not pushing the envelope, very far. The notion of entrepreneurialism is that you're pushing things, and some of it's going to work, and some of it perhaps not so well. Closing words, thoughts, Dick, before we wrap up?
No, I guess I'd come back to the point that I think this revolution is a quiet one, being, I think, mostly ignored, but environmentalists, I think, have a real opportunity to help advance this innovation that can lead to sustainability and equity. And I think it offers us hope in a time, particularly when agriculture causes such troubles. So I thank you, Howard, for inviting me to get some feedback on this research, and thanks to everybody for participating today. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Hey, thank you everyone for joining the call today. Thank you to Dick Munson for the thoughtful conversation, for the good questions people have asked. Please stay in touch with us here, elpc.org. We'll be hosting future webinars on a variety of topics. Keep an eye out for emails and notices of this. And you're going to be hearing and seeing more and more from the Environmental Law and Policy Center, very much on the issues that Dick has been describing today: food health, animal health, safety, ways in which the agricultural system here in the Midwest breadbasket of the country can work better for more people, be more sustainable and more equitable. So thank you. Be safe, be well, and let's hope 2021 is going to be here. Right? See everybody.
Thanks very much.